Hey there, Willowbrook, and thanks so much for doing our daily Devo. Today we are in Exodus chapter 14. Have you ever noticed that there's so many times in life where we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place, between a bad choice and a badder choice, a hard situation and a harder situation? It's one of those things where you go, I know I don't want to be in this situation, but the alternative doesn't look good either. The Israelites have found themselves in that kind of scenario as we look at Exodus chapter 14. They come out of slavery in Egypt only to find themselves pursued by the Egyptians and stuck, kind of at a dead end with nowhere to go. And if you found yourselves in that situation, you understand the panic that begins to well up in you. Everybody deals with this kind of scenario differently, but I love that the Bible records how the Israelites dealt with it. In verse 11, they use sarcasm, like terrified sarcasm, when they say to Moses, they said, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? They are like, hey, what's the point? Why are we here? And I think a lot of times we can find ourselves asking some of the same questions. What's going on? Why are we even doing this? What am I supposed to do in this situation? Because I know I don't want to continue like this, but the alternative doesn't look good either. And I think, at least for me, and I think for a lot of you, immediately our brain goes into action. It goes into problem-solving mode. We are thinking through what the strategy, what the answers might be. We are pursuing all kinds of scenarios, thinking it through, maybe even pursuing guidance from other people. But we don't stop and remember that God is God. That God is not confused by our situation. He's not at a loss. God is not in between a rock and a hard place. But rarely is my natural inclination to think, you know what? God's got this. But that's what God tells them to do in verse 14. Verse 14, it says, the Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. When was the last time that you were still before God? That you were able to sit, take a deep breath, and relax without the anxiety of the scenario, and know that God is God. Psalm 46:10, it says, be still and know that I am God. Recently, in my own personal time with the Lord, I have begun a discipline where I am really practicing stillness before God. And here's how I'm doing it. I actually, on my Apple Watch, I take the timer and I set it for 2 minutes. For 2 minutes, I sit and know that God is God. And I've found that my mind begins to wander sometimes. And what I think about when my mind wanders is that God is God over where my mind wandered. Because my mind still wants to fix things. My mind still wants to figure things out. My mind still will feel the weight of the situation. And then I will remind myself, God is God over that. He has authority. So whatever you're finding yourself in the middle of, the rock and the hard place, the hard thing that you're experiencing today, what if you began to practice a discipline of sitting in stillness with God and remembering that He will fight for you? You don't have to figure it all out. It's not even your job. He wants to come alongside you and guide you and help you navigate all the scenarios, because often our minds only think of what our natural self can do, and we forget that in the supernatural, God can do way more than we can even begin to think, hope, or imagine. He's able. Ephesians 3:20 tells us he is able. So be still and know that he is God. I love you, Willowbrook, and I hope that you'll have a happy Wednesday.